All right, let's jump into this deep dive, shall we? Today, we're tackling mental health resources in Maine schools.
Definitely a hot topic, and for good reason.
You bet, especially with all the recent news about the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act and the funding it's providing.
Huge implications for Maine
Oh
schools.
yeah, Maine actually snagged a pretty sizable chunk of that, funding a cool $9 million.
9 million. Wow, that's a big deal.
Yeah, and that money is being channeled to 9 specific school districts across the state.
Makes sense. Spread the resources where they're needed most.
Exactly. You've got districts like Franklin, Jay, even up north in Presque Isle and Lubec.
So covering a good geographic range then.
Absolutely. These districts were carefully selected.
And what were the criteria? I'm curious.
Well, a big factor was their designation as high-need districts,
High need meaning.
meaning they had a seriously low student-to-mental health provider ratio.
Ah, I see. So really struggling to meet the needs of their students.
Right, and that's where this funding comes in, providing a much-needed boost.
But there are bound to be challenges too, right? I mean, sustainability, for one.
You hit the nail on the head. What happens when the funding runs dry?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
No pun intended,
Mm.
right. So let's break down exactly how this $9 million is being used.
All right, lay it on me.
Well, the breakdown's pretty interesting. A good chunk, $5 million, is going directly towards staffing.
Staffing, as in hiring new mental health professionals.
Exactly. Think counselors, social workers, school psychologists, the whole shebang.
That makes sense. Got to have the manpower, right?
You got it. But here's where the really smart thinking comes in. The other $4 million is being dedicated to something just as critical.
Let me guess. Training. Professional development for those new hires.
Close, but even bigger picture. It's all about recruitment, AD retention.
Ah, so not just getting them in the door, but making sure they stick around.
You got it. Because, let's face it, rural Maine can be a tough place to attract and keep qualified professionals.
Especially in fields like mental health, where the demand is already so high.
Exactly. I mean, we talked to one superintendent, Mark Hatch, from RSU 54 up in the Skowhegan area.
And what was his take on all of this?
Well, he was pretty candid about the challenges they've been facing, even before this funding came through.
I bet rural districts often get overlooked when it comes to resource allocation.
Yeah, he painted a pretty stark picture. Families having to wait months, sometimes even longer, just to get an appointment with a counselor.
Months. That's outrageous, especially when you're dealing with kids who need help now.
And that's just the tip of the iceberg. We have to remember the context here. This funding is rolling out amid some pretty alarming trends in student mental health.
Trends like, fill me in.
Well, there's this really insightful study, the Maine Integrated Youth Health Survey. Have you heard of it?
Oh, yeah, that's a gold mine of data on adolescent well-being.
And their latest findings were pretty sobering, let me tell you.
So what did they find?
The numbers are pretty stark. Nearly 20% of high school students in Maine had seriously considered suicide in the past year.
Whoa, 20%. That's a significant jump from pre-pandemic levels, isn't it?
A big jump. It really underlines the urgency of this whole situation.
No doubt the pandemic definitely exacerbated these issues. The isolation, the stress, it all took a toll.
For sure. But even with this funding, there's still a long road ahead.
What makes you say that? Isn't the $9 million making a difference?
It is, but let's be real, it's not a magic bullet.
So what are we looking at then?
Well, the truth is, even with this influx of cash, only 2 of the 9 districts have managed to put a dedicated mental health professional in every single school, every day.
That means the majority are still playing catch-up so far.
Yep. And one district that's been really vocal about the ongoing struggles is Lewiston Public Schools.
What's the situation there?
Staffing shortages, big time. They're desperate for school counselors and social workers, just can't find enough qualified people.
And I'm guessing they're not alone. This feels like a statewide issue.
It is, and that brings us back to that nagging question of sustainability.
Right. What happens when the money runs out? Because let's be honest, you can't just throw money at a complex problem and expect it to disappear.
Exactly. It's a Band-Aid, not a cure.
So where do we go from here?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? This funding is making a real difference. Kids are getting access to services they wouldn't have had otherwise.
Absolutely. But it's a temporary fix.
And that's the key takeaway for our listeners, right?
Yeah.
This is a crucial first step, but it's only the beginning.
It begs the question, how do we ensure long-term access to quality mental health care for all Maine students?
Especially in those rural communities that are often overlooked.
It's a complex issue involving schools, communities, families, healthcare providers, even state-level policy.
The conversation we need to keep having, that's for sure.
So to our listeners, I'd say this. Think about the role you can play in addressing this challenge.
What kind of future do you envision for the young people in your community?
It's something worth pondering.
For sure. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone.
Until next time.